My mom shrugged. That's just how they are after my dad and brother kept taking everything I owned. When they finally aimed for my house, I just told them it will be the last stupid thing you do. Growing up in my family wasn't exactly like your typical sitcom family where everyone has each other's backs. My dad, Alan, and my older brother, Jason, weren't just entitled. They were masters at it. They had it down to an art. My mom, Linda, wasn't much help either. She just went along with whatever they did, no matter how messed up it was. Her favorite line was always, "That's just how they are," as if that was some magical excuse to let them do whatever they wanted. Alan's entitlement started way before I was born. He always acted like the world owed him something, and apparently having kids was just a way to get more people to do stuff for him. He told me once about how his parents never said no to him growing up. If he wanted something, he got it, no questions asked. He liked to say, "That's how families should work," but what he really meant was, "Everyone should do what I want or else." Jason was basically a carbon copy of Alan, just younger and more smug about it. If Alan said something, Jason was right there backing him up like a little mini sidekick. He didn't just inherit the entitlement. He leveled it up. He'd make fun of me for being too sensitive whenever I tried to stand up for myself. If Alan took my stuff, Jason would laugh and tell me to stop being dramatic. They were like a two-man wrecking crew for my sanity. I can't even count how many times they just took my stuff because they thought it was theirs by default. One time, I spent weeks saving up for a new laptop. I needed it for school, and I was so proud when I finally bought it. Literally, 2 days after I got it, Jason grabbed it and started installing all these games. I told him to give it back, and he just said, "Relax. You're not even using it right now." Alan chimed in, "He's your brother. Let him borrow it." Borrow? Yeah, right. I never saw it again, without Jason's greasy fingerprints all over the screen. This was my life with them. Alan would take whatever he wanted, and Jason would back him up like it was his duty. Linda, she just stayed out of it, shrugging and muttering about how boys will be boys. No one ever had my back. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to keep it hidden or make it so they couldn't touch it. By the time I turned 18, I knew I had to get out of there. Living under their roof was suffocating. Every day was a reminder that nothing was mine. Not my stuff, not my time, not even my peace. I started saving every penny I could from my part-time job at a local hardware store. That's how I ended up with a 1998 Honda Accord. It wasn't much to look at. It had rust spots, a cracked tail light, and the engine sounded like it had a smoker's cough, but it was mine. I spent months fixing it up. Every paycheck went toward parts and repairs, new tires, a tune-up replacing the battery, you name it. I did it. I wasn't just fixing a car, I was building my escape plan. Of course, Alan and Jason didn't see it that way. To them, the Accord wasn't my hard-earned ticket to freedom. It was just another thing they could use whenever they felt like it. I tried to set boundaries, but they didn't care. Jason took it the first time without even asking. I came home from work and the car was gone. I freaked out and started calling everyone, only for Jason to stroll in hours later like nothing happened. He tossed me the keys and said, "Relax, I just took it for a spin." Alan backed him up, of course. "It's just a car," he said. "Don't make a big deal out of it." Things got worse from there. Every time I turned around, the car was gone again. They didn't even bother asking most of the time. I'd come home from a long shift and find out they'd been using it for who knows what. One day, they brought it back with a huge dent in the side. I lost it. "What the heck happened to my car?" I yelled. Jason just shrugged. "It's old. Who cares?" Alan Ever the diplomat added. "You should be grateful we even brought it back." That's when I started hiding the keys. I wasn't about to let them trash the only thing I had, but hiding the keys only made them more determined. One night, I woke up to the sound of Jason rummaging through my room looking for them. When I caught him, he just laughed and said, "Don't be so paranoid." The final straw came one morning when I woke up and the car was gone again. This time they were working as a team. Alan had found the spare key I didn't even know they had, and he and Jason had taken the car on one of their infamous trips. I called the cops. Hours later, I got a call from the police. Alan had been pulled over for speeding, and Jason was in the passenger seat laughing about it. When I went to pick up the car, Alan had the nerve to lecture me. "If you weren't so selfish, we wouldn't have to do this," he said. "Are you serious?" I snapped. "You stole my car." When we got home, Alan sat me down in the living room and dropped the hammer. "If you can't handle living under my roof, then you're out. You have 2 weeks to pack your stuff." Jason was sitting in the corner smirking like he had just won some kind of prize. "Good luck out there," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Getting kicked out wasn't even the worst part. I mean, sure, it felt like a slap in the face, but honestly, I'd seen it coming for a while. Alan always had to have the last word, and Jason loved stirring the pot. What really pushed me over the edge was how smug they both were about it. Like they genuinely thought they were teaching me some sort of lesson. I spent the first night just lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I ended up here. All I wanted was to have something that was mine, something they couldn't take or ruin. That stupid old Honda Accord was supposed to be my ticket out of their grasp, and now not only had they wrecked it, but I was out on my rear with nowhere to go. The next morning, I went out to check the car. It was sitting in the driveway like nothing had happened. but it felt different now. I walked around it, running my hand along the side. The dent Jason put in it was still there, glaring at me like a reminder of every boundary they'd bulldozed. The interior smelled like fast food and sweat. They'd left trash in the back seat, empty soda cans, crumpled up wrappers. My car, the one thing I'd worked so hard for, had been turned into their personal dumpster. I started cleaning it out, muttering to myself the whole time. Selfish? Really, I'm the selfish one. Every piece of garbage I threw away felt like I was tossing out a piece of their entitlement. It didn't make me feel any better, though. The damage was done. As I was wiping down the dashboard, Alan came out onto the porch with his coffee, acting like he owned the place. Well, he did technically, but you know what I mean. He leaned on the railing, watching me like he was waiting for something. Finally, he said, "What's your plan, genius?" I didn't even look at him. "What's it to you?" He laughed like I had just said the funniest thing in the world. "You think you can survive out there without us? Good luck." Jason stepped out behind him, shirtless and eating a bowl of cereal like he hadn't a care in the world. "Yeah, you're going to come crawling back in a month. Bet money on it." I wanted to snap back, but what was the point? They'd already made up their minds about me. Anything I said would just add fuel to their fire, so I just kept cleaning the car. Alan eventually got bored and went back inside, but Jason hung around leaning against the porch rail like he had nothing better to do. "You know," he said between bites of cereal, "Dad's right. You're going to fail. You don't have what it takes to make it on your own." I finally looked at him, and for a second, I thought about saying something, but then I realized nothing I said would matter. Jason wasn't looking for a conversation. He just wanted to get under my skin, so I slammed the car door shut and walked back into the house to pack. Packing was weirdly emotional. I didn't have a lot, but every little thing I owned felt like a battle I'd won. Clothes, books, my tools, all of it had a story. Most of those stories involved me working my rear off to buy or fix something only for Alan or Jason to dismiss it as nothing special. I stuffed everything I could into a couple of duffel bags and a toolbox, but it still didn't feel like enough. What was I even going to do? I had no real plan. I couldn't afford an apartment, and I wasn't about to couch surf with relatives who just parroted Alan's nonsense back at me. But one thing was clear. I wasn't staying here another second longer than I had to. Loading up the car felt like the first real step toward freedom, even if I had no idea where I was going. I threw my bags in the back seat and checked the glove compartment for my savings. I had a couple $100, enough to get me by for a little while, but not much longer than that. For a split second, I thought about going back inside. Maybe if I swallowed my pride and apologized. For what exactly? For standing up for myself. No. I shook my head and started the car. There was nothing left for me here. As I pulled out of the driveway, I felt a weird mix of relief and fear. Relief that I was finally getting away from them, but fear of what came next. Where was I going to sleep tonight? What if the car broke down? What if they were right and I couldn't do this on my own? I drove aimlessly for a while, just trying to clear my head. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of a grocery store. I parked in the far corner away from everyone else and just sat there for a while. It felt weird, like I was in limbo halfway between the life I was leaving behind and whatever came next. I spent the night in the car, curled up in the driver's seat with a hoodie for a pillow. The next morning, I woke up stiff and groggy but determined. I wasn't going to let Alan and Jason be right about me. I didn't know how, but I was going to figure this out. They thought they'd broken me, but they were wrong. They were about to see what I was really capable of. The idea of a camper hit me while scrolling through my phone half awake and annoyed at how stiff my neck was from the awkward position. I stumbled across a video about tiny homes. At first, I laughed it off. Those things were ridiculously fancy, and I definitely didn't have the money for that kind of setup. But then I saw a picture of a fifth-wheel camper. It wasn't pretty, but it had potential, small, portable, and, most importantly, affordable. That's when it clicked. A camper wasn't just a place to crash, it was freedom. I spent the next few days diving into online listings. It became an obsession. Every break at work, every quiet moment in the car, I was scrolling through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, trying to find something that wouldn't drain my bank account completely. Most of the listings were way out of my price range, like $3,500 for something that looked like it belonged on a reality show. But then I found it a 2001 Keystone Cougar fifth wheel. The pictures weren't great, but I could tell it had good bones. It was just old enough to be cheap, but sturdy enough to last. The guy selling it, Sam, was asking for $3,500, which was still a stretch for me, but I figured I could negotiate. A few days later, I was driving out to meet Sam at his property, which was about 45 minutes from where I was staying, or well parking. "The cougar's over here," he said, leading me around the side of the house. There it was, sitting on a patch of overgrown grass, like it had been forgotten about for a while. The paint was faded, and there were a few dents along the side, but it looked solid. "She's a little rough around the edges," Sam admitted, "but the plumbing works and the roof doesn't leak. Tires are new too." I walked around it, checking every detail. The interior wasn't much to look at, cramped and dated with peeling wallpaper and a faint, musty smell, but it had everything I needed: a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough space for a bed. "How firm are you on the price?" I asked, trying to sound confident, even though my stomach was doing flips. Sam scratched his chin, thinking it over. Tell you what, if you can haul it out of here this week, I'll knock it down to $3,000. It was still a lot of money, but I couldn't pass it up. Deal, I said, shaking his hand. The next hurdle was figuring out how to actually tow the thing. My Honda wasn't going to cut it, so I called my cousin Ethan. He was one of the few family members who wasn't completely wrapped up in my dad's nonsense. Ethan was the kind of guy who always had a solution, usually involving tools, a truck, or both. When I told him what I was up to, he didn't even hesitate. Bring your car over and we'll figure it out. Ethan's place was about 20 minutes outside town, on a chunk of land big enough to house his collection of old trucks and project cars. He'd been working on cars since high school, and his garage was a mechanic's dream. When I pulled into his driveway, he was already outside, wiping his hands on a rag. "So you're really doing this, huh?" he said, grinning as he leaned against the hood of his truck. "Yeah," I said. "I've got to get out of here. This is the only way I can afford my own space." He nodded like he got it completely. "All right, let's see what we're working with." We spent the rest of the afternoon rigging up his truck to tow the camper. Ethan had a knack for making things work even if it meant bending a few rules. By the time we were done, his truck was ready to haul, and I was starting to feel like this might actually happen. "You can park it here if you need to," Ethan said as we wrapped up. "I've got plenty of space, and it's not like your dad's going to show up here." "Thanks," I said, relieved. "I owe you big time." The next day, we drove out to Sam's place to pick up the camper. Towing it back to Ethan's property was nerve-wracking. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting something to go wrong, but we made it without a hitch. The first night in the camper was surreal. It wasn't fancy, far from it. I slept on an old mattress that smelled vaguely of mildew, surrounded by peeling wallpaper, and a tiny sink that dripped if you didn't turn it off just right. Over the next few days, I started fixing it up. I scrubbed every surface, patched a small hole in the floor, and added some cheap string lights I found at the dollar store. Ethan helped me hook up a water supply, and I managed to find a used propane tank for the stove. It wasn't much, but it was starting to feel like home. I thought moving would give me some peace, but of course Alan and Jason couldn't leave well enough alone. I didn't tell them where I was staying, but news travels fast in my family. I guess someone mentioned my setup to them, probably thinking they were making polite conversation. Next thing I knew, they were back in my business. A couple of days later, Ethan came to the camper while I was working on patching up the roof. "You've got company," he said, pointing toward the driveway. I climbed down the ladder and spotted Alan's beat-up truck pulling in with Jason riding shotgun. "Great," I muttered, wiping my hands on my jeans. "What do they want now?" Alan got out first, acting like he owned the place. Jason followed, his usual smug expression plastered across his face. They didn't even say hi. Alan just walked right up to the camper, looking it over like he was appraising it. "Nice setup you've got here," he said, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "Looks like it could use a little TLC, though. You keeping up with the maintenance?" "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, crossing my arms. Alan smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "We've been talking, and we think it's time you showed a little gratitude. Let us take the camper out for a weekend. It's not like you're doing anything important with it." Jason jumped in before I could answer. "Yeah, it's just sitting here. You can live without it for a couple of days." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I took a deep breath before responding. "No, this is my home. I'm not lending it to you." Alan's face hardened. "You're being ridiculous. We're family. Families help each other out." "Funny how that works," I shot back, "because the only time you want to help is when it benefits you." Jason rolled his eyes. "Here we go again. Always the victim. Aren't you?" I ignored him and focused on Alan. "You've taken enough from me." The answer's no. Ethan, who'd been watching from a distance, decided he'd heard enough. He walked over and stood next to me, crossing his arms. "You heard him," Ethan said. "No means no." Alan glared at Ethan like he was some kind of traitor. "This doesn't concern you," Ethan smirked. "It does when you're on my property." For a moment, I thought Alan was going to blow up, but instead he shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." He turned to Jason. "Come on. We're leaving. You're going to regret this," he said as they drove off. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, I started getting calls and texts from family members. Alan and Jason had been busy spinning their version of the story. According to them, I was being selfish and ungrateful, refusing to help out my poor dad, who just wanted a nice weekend away. "Why can't you just let him borrow it?" one of my aunts asked over the phone. "It's not like you're using it for anything important." "It's my home," I replied for what felt like the 100th time. "Would you let someone take your house for the weekend?" "That's not the same," she argued. "He's your father." Exactly. That was the problem. The calls didn't stop. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them weren't on my side. I started ignoring my phone altogether. Ethan tried to cheer me up by joking about how Alan and Jason were like bad movie villains always plotting their next move. It was funny at first, but the constant pressure was wearing me down. The breaking point came when they showed up again. I was sitting outside enjoying a rare moment of peace when I heard the rumble of their truck coming up the driveway. I groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." Alan didn't even bother with pleasantries. He got out of the truck and pointed at the camper. "We're taking it," he said, like it was already decided. I stood up. "The heck you are." Jason leaned against the truck, smirking as usual. "We figured we'd give you a chance to do the right thing, but clearly you're too stubborn for that. Ethan came out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. You're not taking anything, he said, his voice calm but firm, unless you want me to call the cops. That got Alan's attention. You wouldn't dare, he said, his tone low. Ethan didn't flinch. Try me. There was a tense moment where I thought things might actually get physical, but Alan backed down. He muttered something under his breath and got back in the truck. Jason gave me a sarcastic little wave as they drove off. This isn't over, he said. I thought things would settle down after Ethan stood his ground. I mean, how many times can you be told no before you finally get the message? But Alan and Jason weren't the type to let anything go, especially when they felt disrespected. For them, it wasn't just about the camper, it was about control. If they couldn't have it, they'd make sure I regretted keeping it from them. A few weeks passed without any drama. I started to let my guard down, thinking maybe they'd finally moved on. Ethan even joked about it one night while we were working on his truck. You think they're plotting their next move, or did I scare them off for good? He asked, grinning. Probably both, I said. Alan's not exactly the forgive and forget type. I should have known better than to assume the quiet meant anything good. Turns out, they were just waiting for the right moment. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, when I woke up to the sound of something outside. At first I thought it was the wind. Ethan's property was pretty open and the camper would creak sometimes if the breeze picked up. But this wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, followed by the metallic clink of something hitting the hitch. My stomach dropped. I got up quietly, my heart pounding in my chest, and peeked through the window. Sure enough, there they were. Alan and Jason crouched by the hitch, trying to unhook the camper. Alan was fumbling with the locks, while Jason held a flashlight, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, like a kid stealing from the cookie jar. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. I couldn't believe they'd actually sunk this low, but then the shock wore off and the anger kicked in. This wasn't just some petty argument anymore. They were trying to steal my home. I grabbed my phone and threw on a hoodie. Bursting out of the camper, I shouted, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" They both jumped, Alan dropping the tools he'd been using. Jason, ever the quicker one, tried to play it off. Relax, man. We were just... Don't even start. I cut him off. You're trying to steal my camper in the middle of the night. Are you insane? Alan straightened up, brushing off his hands, like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. It's not stealing, he said. Like that made any sense? We're your family. We just wanted to borrow it for a couple of days. You mean steal it? I shot back, because that's what this is. Jason stepped forward, flashlight still in hand. Don't be so dramatic. It's not like we were going to keep it. Get off my property, I said, pointing toward their truck. Now before I call the cops. Alan's face twisted into a sneer. You'd really call the cops on your own father over this? Jason rolled his eyes. Oh, here we go. Always the victim. You need to grow up. Grow up, I repeated, laughing bitterly. You're the one sneaking around in the middle of the night like a darn criminal. Before they could respond, Ethan's porch light flicked on and the door swung open. Ethan stepped out holding a crowbar in one hand and a flashlight in the other. What's going on out here? He called, his voice calm but firm. Alan and Jason both froze. Alan, probably thinking he could smooth things over, raised his hands. We're just having a little family disagreement, he said. Ethan wasn't buying it. Looks to me like you're trespassing. You want to explain why you're messing with a camper at this hour? Jason tried to jump in, but Ethan cut him off. Save it. You've got about 30 seconds to get in your truck and leave, or I'm calling the cops myself. After they were gone, Ethan turned to me. You okay? Yeah, I said, though my heart was still racing. Thanks for coming out, he nodded. Figured they'd pull something like this eventually. You should probably think about adding some extra security just in case. I was already planning on it, I said, running a hand through my hair. This just sealed the deal. The next day, I went into full lockdown mode. I bought motion sensor lights and heavy-duty locks for every part of the camper that could be accessed. I even found a GPS tracker online that I could attach to the undercarriage. If they ever managed to move the camper, I'd know exactly where it went. Ethan helped me install everything, and by the time we were done, the camper looked more like a fortress than a home. If they come back, they're going to need a darn tow truck, Ethan joked. Though I could tell he was just as frustrated as I was. Alan and Jason didn't try anything for a while after that, but the damage was already done. Every little sound outside made me suspicious, and I started checking the locks obsessively. It wasn't just about the camper anymore. It was about feeling safe, and they'd taken that from me. The real showdown came at the family barbecue. Ethan had offered to host it that year, and I figured it was a good chance to reconnect with some of the less dramatic members of the family. I parked the camper off to the side of his property, far enough from the main area to give myself some space, but close enough to keep an eye on it. Things were going well at first. I caught up with a few cousins, played a game of cornhole, and even managed to laugh a little. For a moment, it felt like maybe we could all just have a normal day without any drama. And then Alan showed up. He didn't waste any time. The moment he saw the camper, his face twisted into a scowl, and he made a beeline for me. Jason was right behind him, smirking like he couldn't wait to watch the fireworks. You really brought it here, Alan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You couldn't let your old man borrow it, but you'll drag it out here to show off. I sighed, already exhausted by the conversation. It's my home, Dad. I'm allowed to take it wherever I want. Unbelievable, he said, throwing his hands up. You don't care about family at all, do you? After everything we've done for you. Jason chimed in. Because of course he did. Yeah, real classy man. You're making this whole thing about you. By now, a small crowd had gathered, clearly enjoying the drama. Before I could respond, Qley, one of my cousins, stepped in. Honestly, he's right, she said, crossing her arms. Maybe it's time you two stop treating him like garbage. This isn't about the camper. It's about control, and everyone here knows it. Alan turned bright red, and Jason looked like he'd been slapped. The rest of the family stayed quiet, which was probably the best thing they could have done. Alan muttered something about how no one respected him anymore and stormed off, Jason trailing behind him. I didn't win any popularity points that day, but I didn't care. For once, someone had called them out, and it wasn't just me standing there alone. The next morning, we hitched the camper to Ethan's truck and moved it closer to the garage. It wasn't as picturesque as the spot by the trees, but it was safer. Ethan also helped me install a new motion sensor light that covered the entire driveway. If Alan and Jason tried to come back, they'd be lit up like a Christmas tree. I also decided to take things a step further. Using the GPS tracker I'd installed earlier, I set up an alert system on my phone. If the camper moved more than a few feet without me knowing, I'd get an instant notification. It wasn't foolproof, but it was better than nothing. Alan and Jason didn't show up again after that, but I knew it was only a matter of time. They'd made it clear they weren't going to let this go, and I wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about the camper anymore. It was about standing my ground. For once in my life, I wasn't going to let them take something from me. As I sat in the camper that night, surrounded by the soft glow of the string lights I'd put up, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. They could try all they wanted, but this was my home, and I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. For a while, things stayed quiet. Alan and Jason must have realized that showing up uninvited wasn't going to work anymore, especially with Ethan ready to shut them down the second they tried something. But knowing them, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something. They never really let things go. They just waited for the next opportunity. And that opportunity came when I had to leave town for work. It wasn't anything major, just a couple of days helping out at another branch of the company I worked for. Before I left, I triple-checked everything. The camper was locked up tight, the GPS tracker was set, and Ethan promised to keep an eye on things while I was gone. I even joked with him about needing a security detail. Don't worry, he said, smirking. If they try anything, I'll handle it. I didn't think they'd have the guts to try again, especially after the mess they'd been causing. The first night I was away, I got a notification on my phone from the GPS tracker. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe a strong wind had jostled the camper, or a curious animal had triggered the motion sensors. But when I opened the app and saw the live location, my stomach dropped. The camper was moving. I stared at the screen trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't just moving a little. It was cruising down the highway, heading away from Ethan's property. I called Ethan immediately. Hey, did you move the camper? I asked, my voice shaking. What? No, he said, sounding confused. Why? Because it's gone, I said. The GPS says it's halfway to town. There was a brief silence on his end, followed by a sharp curse. That son of a... It's got to be your dad. I called the police right away. Trying to explain to the dispatcher that my dad had stolen my camper wasn't exactly easy. She asked for proof of ownership, and I told her I had the title and the GPS logs to back it up. She said they'd send officers to intercept the vehicle and advised me not to confront him myself, as if that was even an option. I wasn't anywhere near the camper. Meanwhile, Ethan wasn't waiting around. Send me the GPS location, he said. I'm heading out now. I gave him the coordinates and then sat there staring at my phone, helpless and furious. Alan and Jason had really done it this time. Stealing my car was one thing, but this was on another level. It didn't take long for Ethan to catch up with them. He called me as soon as he spotted the camper. They're on Old Mill Road, he said. I'm staying back until the cops get here, but I can see them clear as day. Your dad's driving and Jason's riding shotgun. Figures, I muttered. Just keep an eye on them. A few minutes later, the police arrived. Ethan stayed on the line describing everything as it happened. The officers pulled Alan over just as he was turning into his driveway. Ethan parked nearby watching as the situation unfolded. They're talking to him now, he said. Your dad's trying to argue, but they don't look like they're buying it. I felt a small surge of satisfaction hearing that. Alan had always been good at talking his way out of trouble, but this time, he'd gone too far. The call ended when Ethan said he'd head back after the situation was under control. By the time I got back into town the next day, Alan had already been arrested. Jason wasn't charged. He wasn't the one driving, but he'd apparently thrown a fit when the police took Alan away. When I went to the station to provide my statement, the officer handling the case was surprisingly understanding. You're sure you want to press charges? She asked. This is your father after all. Yes, I said without hesitation. He's been crossing lines my whole life and I'm done letting him get away with it. Alan pleaded guilty a few weeks later. He avoided jail time, but he was slapped with a hefty fine and ordered to pay restitution for the trouble he caused. I heard through the family grapevine that he was furious about the whole thing, but I didn't care. I was done listening to his excuses. Jason, meanwhile, sulked in the background, acting like the victim in all this. He even tried to call me once, but I didn't bother picking up. The rest of the family was divided. Some thought I'd gone too far, that I should have just let Alan borrow the camper and avoided all the drama. Others like Qley said it was about time someone stood up to him. For the first time, I didn't really care what any of them thought. I was finally free from their nonsense, and that was all that mattered. With Alan and Jason out of the picture, I decided it was time to hit the road. I'd been saving up, and I finally had enough to make a fresh start. Ethan helped me make sure the camper was road ready, and we even installed a few extra security measures just in case. "You're really leaving, huh?" Ethan said as we hooked up the camper to my truck. "Yeah," I said. "It's time," he nodded. "Well, don't be a stranger. And if Alan or Jason tries anything, call me. I'll take care of it," I laughed. "Thanks, man, for everything." Driving away from Ethan's property felt surreal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just running from something. I was running towards something. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it was my decision. I spent the first few nights parked at a campsite just outside town getting used to life on the road. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. I'd sit outside the camper at night looking up at the stars and feeling more at ease than I ever had before. One evening, as I was sitting by a small campfire, I thought about everything that had led me here. Alan, Jason, the family drama. It all felt so far away now. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living totally on my own ties, completely cut with my parents and brother. And that was my closure.